The Honorable Mark Cojuangco is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise on a matter of personal and collective privilege regarding the urgency and imperative of nuclear electricity for the Philippines. Madam Speaker, distinguished colleagues, Bill Gates once said, if there is any single thing you could lower the price of to eliminate poverty, by far it would be the price of energy. Indeed, if the Philippines did not have power shortages post-1986 and consequently had lower electricity prices, would it not be then plausible to assume that we could have increased our GDP by an incremental, just an additional 1% for each of the years post-1986 until today? If we accept this premise, does it not imply that our economy should be at least around 36% larger than it is today? Our 2021 GDP was 21.6 trillion pesos. 36% larger is 29.38 trillion pesos. 7.78 trillion just for 2021 alone. Would that not equate to millions of jobs that never materialized? Higher pay? Would that not have meant that there would have been less or no deindustrialization, which forced so many to have to live and work abroad? The economic opportunity loss from this avoidance of the Philippines as an investment destination because of high power prices and grid fragility has not cost us millions or billions of pesos in lost opportunity. This has cost us trillions of pesos, and its effects continue to be trillions yearly to this day. And all that, if the incremental economic opportunity cost for not having nuclear was just 1% of GDP. Could it have been 2% more? I only remember that during the Asian boom times, some of our neighbors achieved double-digit growth rates. We did not. Could we have avoided the power shortages, the highly pollutive diesel power barges, the diesel generator on every street corner and commercial establishment, and in most government offices? The onerously high power cost to all citizens and fragile grid that linger to this day? Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleagues, in a word, yes. Our 100% complete BNPP completed its hot functional testing in March of 1984, generating approximately 5 megawatts on and off for several months, proving that it is not the white elephant its detractors want to make it out to be. BNPP is one of the last 4 two-loop nuclear plants designed in the first nuclear era by Westinghouse. The other 3 are Angra 1 in Brazil, KRSKO in Slovenia, Kori 2 in South Korea. These 3 are all running in their home countries and are award winners for uptime and reliability. In May of 1985, BNPP was subjected to inspection by IAEA's OSART-2 mission. OSART means Operational Safety Review Team, which came to the Philippines. And it received favorable endorsement. It was subsequently declared as ready for core loading with nuclear fuel. Reasons why it was not loaded and run are political in nature and can be found in then Energy Minister Jeronimo Velasco's memoirs. It had something to do with the then U.S. Ambassador Stephen Bosworth's what I consider meddling in the Philippines' internal affairs. February 1986 shortly came around, and the rest is history. Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleagues, BNPP could have opened the nuclear door for the Philippines just as it did in South Korea. South Korea has half our population. Kasabay lang po ng BNPP ang CORI 2. CORI 2 paid for itself in about 6 years of operations. Today, Korea has 24 running nuclear plants, many of which are still in their amortization period. Electricity in Korea costs approximately 4 US cents per kilowatt hour wholesale. That's approximately 2 pesos and 20 centavos per kilowatt hour wholesale. In the United States of America, where the almost 100-strong fleet operates, the plants are mostly fully amortized. There, according to EIA, Energy Information Administration, nuclear costs approximately 2.3 US cents per kilowatt hour. That's 1 peso and 27 centavos per kilowatt hour wholesale. Imagine if we built nuclear plants instead of coal and gas plants since 1986, moving forward till today and onward. We probably would have kept pace with the economic development of our Korean brothers. But even if we did not, we probably would not be left as far behind as our approximately 20 to 1 lower per capita consumption of energy would indicate. In a way, that's a definition of our poverty. Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleagues, the charts depicted here illustrate how deadly various forms of energy are, including wind and solar. It can be seen that nuclear is the least deadly. And if we exclude Chernobyl, because it has no containment, and which has an all-time casualty rate of less than 50 since 1986, these charts would read 0 for nuclear. The implication, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleagues, is that nuclear has already saved over 2 million lives by avoiding all other forms of energy wherever it is located. The further implication, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleagues, is that the coal and other fossil plants we have allowed and permitted in Bataan, Zambales, Pangasinan, Quezon, Batangas, Pampanga, Bulacan, Iloilo, Cebu, Misamis Oriental, Davao City, Davao del Sur, Sultan Kudarat, and other parts of the Philippines have caused a few thousand of premature deaths among Filipinos since 1986 until today. Lives which could have gone on to full expectation had we operated BNPP and built a nuclear fleet instead of a coal and gas fleet of power plants. And yet so few protest these. Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleagues, what enables nuclear to be magically cheap, clean yet reliable is the energy density of uranium, which is many millions of times higher than even the most potent of fossil fuels like gasoline, diesel, LNG, or coal. There's a chart for that. That's the wrong chart. The illustration below depicts comparison to uranium to these fossil fuels. You can see in the chart below also a depiction of the 51 Panamax-sized ships of 50,000 tons each needed to run a BNPP-sized coal plant for 18 months. The equivalent nuclear fuel is one jeepney a single time every 18 months. Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleagues, for each gigawatt of nuclear capacity we build, we will avoid at least $600 million of coal or LNG importation per year. Maybe more since prices have risen since the Russian war. The equivalent nuclear fuel will cost approximately 20 to 30 million US dollars. Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleagues, we can totally eliminate the ocean shipping infrastructure and fleet of coal or LNG ships that keep our electricity and lights on. Surely, distinguished colleagues, this is a matter which impacts not only energy independence, but also economic security and national security itself. Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleagues, the ocean contains over 4.5 billion tons of self-replenishing natural uranium. To extract this, mining is not needed. Fibers which are placed in the sea and harvested every other month are what it takes. Ocean uranium already sets a price cap for uranium in the world. Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleagues, there are too many topics connected to nuclear to be covered in a single privileged speech. But let me just inform this august chamber that the EU Parliament, just a week or two ago, realizing that a green energy future is not attainable economically without nuclear, recently voted to include nuclear in its green investment taxonomy. This opens the door to tens of trillions of euro in financing for nuclear power. Allow me to end here for now. I am sure that I have raised enough points for you, my distinguished colleagues, to ponder. We shall tackle in the near future issues regarding nuclear. I look forward to sharing more of the information I have gathered over the last 15 years in future privileged speeches. Till then, mabuhay po kayong lahat, my dear colleagues, Mr. Speaker. Mabuhay at maging masagana ang Pilipinas. Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat.
Majority Leader.
Madam Speaker, I move that we recognize.
My indulgence, Madam Speaker, may I be recognized?
Madam Speaker, I move that we recognize Honorable Paul Dasa.
The Honorable Paul
Northern
Dasa is
Samar.
recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to thank the gentleman from Pangasinan regard bringing up the issue on power. It's been a big problem for all of us, rich or poor, business, anywhere in the Philippines. In my area, electricity is so expensive, and I wanted to maybe just ask if the gentleman would yield for a few questions.
With pleasure, Mr. Speaker. Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, if we talk about electricity, we all know it's very expensive in the Philippines. But I wanted to ask the gentleman, what would be, in layman's term, the effect for poor people, the lower income area families, the regions that are less fortunate? When we have, let's say, nuclear and the rates are reduced, how will that redound to Visayas, Mindanao, the far-off areas? Will Luzon be the only beneficiary?
Mr. Speaker, BNPP is just one nuclear power plant of 620 megawatts, which comprises just a few % of the capacity of the grid. For us to have cheap power by nuclear, we need a fleet of nuclear power plants. We should stop building coal plants and gas plants because every time we spend capital to build these plants, we tie ourselves to coal and gas for 4 more decades for each new plant we build. So, henceforth, if we were looking towards the future, as France did in the 70s when it went for fossil fuel independence from the Arabs, it went nuclear, and in 10 years, between 10 to 15 years, it went to 70% nuclear. And in that time frame, after that, it was unintentional for them to decarbonize, but they found out that they had decarbonized for free. Meaning the intention was to go for energy independence, but they ended up being a very clean electricity grid. So I think that the misconception is that one nuclear plant will make all the difference. We need a fleet of nuclear plants. We need to amortize them so that at the end of the day, we could have half-price electricity. Half-priced electricity.
Thank you for that, Madam Speaker. Maybe just one more question because my colleague, the Honorable Defensor, can't wait to also interpolate. But earlier this afternoon, there were a lot of discussions on the medium-term fiscal framework. And in that framework, energy was mentioned. So I'd like to ask the gentleman if he knows if what the administration is planning on energy, whether this is in the priority or the agenda of the Marcos administration as it relates to the BNPP and energy in general.
Mr. Speaker, we all witnessed the SONA of President BBM, and it's the first time nuclear was mentioned in a very, very long time as far as SONAs go. Whether there's a specific plan to go and how many to build and at what schedule, what time frame to build them, I don't know of any plan that exists. So we have a unique opportunity in this Congress to set policy on how nuclear can grow in this country and eventually cause us to have half-priced electricity.
Madam Speaker, I commend the gentleman for Pangasinan for bringing this issue to the House. Thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Majority Leader.
Madam Speaker, I move that we extend the privilege hour for a few minutes.
There's a motion to extend the privilege hour. Are there any objections? Hearing none, the motion is approved. Majority Leader.
Madam Speaker, I move that we recognize Representative Daniel Manuel of Kabataan Party List for his interpellations. I so move.
The Honorable Daniel Manuel is recognized.
Yes, good evening, Madam Speaker. Since maganda din namang nasimulan yung discussion about nuclear power and its use in the Philippines, I'd like to ask just 2 questions to our previous speaker. Na-mention po yung tungkol sa Bataan Nuclear Power Plant, and I'd like to just clarify about some safety concerns about it and how this can be incorporated into discussions as we explore the use of nuclear energy in our country. Based on studies by Mahar Lagmay, na siyang head ngayon ng Project NOAA, ay merong isang fault na malapit sa kung saan nakatayo yung Bataan Nuclear Power Plant. So maybe The previous speaker has some comment and other related points.
Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, distinguished colleagues, regarding the fault, alleged fault at Bataan, at Murang, at BNPP site, I am not a geologist. But there are geologists who have commented on the issue. One of them was the former head of UP NIGS, National Institute of Geological Sciences, Professor Caloy Arcilla, who has a PhD from Chicago, Illinois. Also, Renato Soledum, who is a PhD and heads the FIVOX, and also the technical people at the MGB of the DNR, and they all say, after looking repeatedly at the Murang site, that there is no fault near the plant.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, but I'd just like to point out that the study of Carlo Arcilla was done in 2005, and he argued that indeed the BNPP is safe, but later studies were done by Mr. Mahar Lagmay starting in 2008, and he is quoted up until now, 2021. Second question is about
Mr.
issues
Speaker,
on...
Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to interject. There's factual error in that statement. The studies of Professor Arcilla are much more recent than 2005. They're post-2010. And in fact, there was a 2-month study done where they dug trenches all around the plant looking for a fault. They did ground-penetrating radar, they did resistivity tests, and they could not find any fault. So he has begun calling the other people, saying there's a fault, as fault finders, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, anyhow, Madam Speaker, we also hope that even in the academic community, they will reach consensus, because any suspicion on these kinds of matters must really be entertained to ensure the safety of our people. Now, for the second question, I'd like to inquire about how we perceive the capacity of our country right now is to be as to how we can manage the wastes that can be produced by going into and harnessing nuclear energy. That would be all, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, waste, the matter of waste is a very long subject matter, but I will endeavor to answer it quickly. First of all, waste, the amount is tiny. If you saw the chart earlier of the millions to one ratio of energy density, you know, 1 jeepney load of fuel every 18 months equates to 1 jeepney load of waste every 18 months, of which 95% is still reusable in future reactors. So there is a 20 times reusability in nuclear waste, meaning to say it is a great wealth of the nation. After which, if you use it 20 times in Gen 4 reactors, it becomes safe after 100 years, and it becomes less radioactive than common garden soil after 300 years. But if we want to waste it, then geological isolation is the solution. The latest technology is deep, 2-kilometer deep horizontal boreholes where this waste is placed, backfilled with bentonite and concrete, and that waste becomes attention and cost-free, gone forever, finality. So, but that would be a waste. You would be wasting the 20 times reusability of that nuclear resource. So the solutions are there. It's just that the detractors do not want to admit that the solutions are there. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That has been an interesting start to this conversation, and we hope that we can foster continuing debates as we proceed in the sessions of Congress. Thank you.
Majority Leader.
Madam Speaker, I move that we recognize the gentleman from the 2nd District of Bataan, Honorable Albert Garcia, for his interpellations. I so move.
The Honorable Albert Garcia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Majority Floor Leader, Madam Speaker. Will the gentleman from Pangasinan yield to a few questions?
With pleasure, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, the gentleman from Pangasinan mentioned the BNPP was supposed to operate in the year 1986, if I'm not mistaken.
Actually, in May of 1985, it was ready for loading with nuclear fuel, Madam Speaker, but political considerations prevented it, notably in Filipino, nakialam yung US ambassador, who later on, when I visited Korea, I saw his pictures on a wall in a boardroom inaugurating nuclear plants in Korea. So I was very disturbed with that picture, because why was BNPP singled out? So that's the story po. There are three identical twins, three identical siblings of BNPP running today that were commissioned at around the same time, 1985, 1984, 1986. So they continue to run to this day and are producing power for their countries, clean, cheap. Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Since it was supposed to operate 1985, I stand corrected, instead of 1986, that would make the Bataan nuclear power plant and its design a little less than 40 years old, if I'm not mistaken.
That's
Madam
correct,
Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker.
And I'm sure over those long period of time, around 40 years, a lot of advancement has happened in terms of the development of energy, not just nuclear, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, I cannot speak about the other energies, or I can speak about the other energies, but the topic is nuclear today. Let me just say that light water reactors are still the same as they were then. China has just put online, I think a year ago, its last generation 2 nuclear reactor new builds. So, for the benefit of my colleagues, a nuclear power plant ages because of the embrittlement of the steel, which is about a foot thick, of its reactor pressure vessel, because of neutron bombardment. Our BNPP has not felt a single neutron, and so the RPV is brand new. There is precedent in the United States, in Tennessee, a 6-year older than BNPP plant was 60% complete, natenga ng dekada. In 2009, 2008, they decided to commission it. It was commissioned in 2016. It is America's newest nuclear power plant today. That is the Watts Bar 2 nuclear power plant in Tennessee. So that is the direct precedent for our case, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker,
May I add, Madam Speaker, Watts Bar 2 was granted a 40-year operating license and is entitled to two 20-year extensions for a total operating lifetime of 80 years. That would be the same of our BNPP. If commissioned, its initial operating license would be for 40 years, and it would be entitled to two 20-year extensions for a total operating lifetime of 80 years.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm not an expert, especially in nuclear energy, unlike the gentleman from Pangasinan. But in latest readings, especially by the book of Bill Gates, How to Prevent a Climate Disaster, he was defining these new, modular, safer, more efficient, and less waste types of nuclear energy. And this is the new generation. And this was the same description by our president during his SONA. These modular types of nuclear power plants that are modular, that are more efficient and safer. And these are the advancement in nuclear energy for the past 40 years. Wouldn't it be more prudent, Madam Speaker, that we consider these new types of nuclear power plants rather than going to a 40-year-old nuclear power plant?
Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, when the President was talking of SMRs, he was referring to only two models of SMRs which are licensed. In fact, the other one is not yet licensed. It still does not have design certification. He's talking about NuScale Power, which has design certification, and the other one is General Electric Hitachi BWRX 300, which does not yet have design certification. Both are LWRs, the same as our BNPP. One is a PWR design, the NuScale, and the BWRX 300 is a boiling water reactor, BWR. Our BNPP is a PWR. So same technology, no change in technology whatsoever. Just smaller, modularized, quicker to construct, cheaper, but the same. Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So if this is the new kind of nuclear power plant, smaller, modular, it doesn't have to use the big, old design of the Bataan nuclear power plant. At the same time, it doesn't have to be located in that area where the surroundings have changed over the last 40 years. It can be located in the fringes where there are where these areas are lacking in power, so that we can have a more efficient distribution of power in our grid. Would that be accurate, Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, the gentleman has been opposed to nuclear power, BNPP in particular, since the 14th Congress, when we were here together debating this. Had BNPP been run even by the Pinoy administration, we would not be having difficulty with power supply. Today, we would have more nuclear plants and power would be much cheaper already today. We have been discussing this for more than 4 decades. The same plant where other countries decided to run it. Never mind the modifications mandated by the Puno Commission, which makes our plant safer than its identical siblings, because they did not bother with Puno Commission mandates. But we did. And still, this plant is not running. So we can debate here another 20 years and not run this plant and still be at the starting gate. My colleague should know that Bangladesh, who we used to look down on as being backward, by next year will commission their first nuclear power plant, which is 1,200 megawatts. 2 BNPPs. The following year, another 1,200 megawatts. That's 4 BNPPs in 2 years. Where will we be? Kulelat, because of this kind of obstructionism. I beg the gentleman to examine the contemporaries of BNPP and see how safe they have been in the world operating up to this day. Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to clarify that if the BNPP were operated in 1985 or 1986 and did not create any problems for our country, then everything would be fine. And we would probably have not undergo the blackouts in the 1990s. I agree with the gentleman. But it wasn't operated, and 40 years or almost 40 years have passed. As one of the citizens and leaders of the province of Bataan, wouldn't it be prudent for us to look at newer, safer, more efficient, and cleaner technology, since the BNPP wasn't operated in 1985? But if it were, and things were going fine, and no accidents, no fallouts, no negative circumstances, then it would be okay. Our only apprehension is that this is a 40-year-old technology. A lot
Madam.
of things have changed, not just in nuclear power development, but also in the surroundings of the BNPP in Bataan, and also Bataan as a whole. If I may say, Madam Speaker, this area, which used to be isolated 40 years ago, is now a tourism hotspot. A lot of resorts, from high-end resorts to backpackers resorts, is surrounding the area of the BNPP. Certainly, a nuclear power plant would not fit in that equation.
Mr. Speaker, may I answer
Another
questions?
circumstances,
There are a whole
Madam
lot
Speaker,
of questions and
if I
points
may-
already
if I may
raised by the
finish.
gentleman,
If I
and
may
I cannot
finish,
keep
Madam
track
Speaker.
mentally of these points unless I answer them. Some of
If I may finish, Madam Speaker, Bataan is already producing for the grid 3,500 megawatts of power. We're one of the main producers of power to the Luzon grid. And for a potential 600 megawatt in BNPP, if anything happens, we put at risk the 3,500 megawatts being produced by Bataan for Metro Manila and
Mr.
neighboring
Speaker,
provinces.
may I answer the point?
Madam Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, it's good the gentleman has mentioned the coal plants. Because, like I said earlier in my privileged speech, which showed the lethality of various kinds of generating sources, the most lethal is coal. Hundreds of deaths per terawatt hours. Why has the leadership of Bataan allowed all these coal plants to cause certain shortening of lifespans in Bataan? Whereas BNPP, a nuclear plant, in the chart shown earlier, shows almost zero lethality. Why has Bataan chosen deadly coal plants over benign nuclear power plants. As for his other points, BNPP in the last 36 years has undergone major earthquakes more than once, the Pinatubo explosion, major typhoons, and if there is anywhere to run to in Bataan if those things hit, it's towards the BNPP because that is the safest structure constructed in the entire Republic of the Philippines. It has a seismic design basis of 0.4 G compared to the seismic design basis of Daiichi in Fukushima, which is only 0.18 G, and yet withstood a 9 earthquake. I could not say to this august body years ago when we were debating before 2010 that if a 9 earthquake hit Murang, nothing would happen to our BNPP. But I can say now, and my basis is Fukushima. Because a 9 earthquake hit there, a plant that had only 0.18 G design basis, sailed through the earthquake, automatically shut down, and was only damaged by the tsunami which followed. Because its generators were located in a basement which became a swimming pool. But our BNPP is located 19 meters above sea level. It would not have even gotten wet with the tsunami which hit Fukushima.
Majority Leader,
Madam Speaker, I move that we suspend session for a few minutes.
session suspended. Session resumed. Majority Leader,
Madam Speaker, I move that the privileged speech of Honorable Mark Cojuangco and its interpellations be referred to the Committee on Rules for its appropriate action. So move, Madam Speaker.
there's a motion. Is there any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved.